When the aliens first walked among the graves of Earth, they believed they had discovered a planet of death worshippers. What they didn't understand, at least, not yet, was that they were walking through humanity's oldest confession of love. The ships came without sound, descending through the twilight over what had once been a small rural town in northern France. The air shimmered with displaced molecules as the vessels landed in a sea of forgotten gravestones, rows upon rows of marble markers, names eroded by time. The newcomers, still silver-skinned beings, called the Immerse, stepped onto the damp soil, their thin feet pressing lightly into the moss. Commander Corral surveyed the landscape through his ocular implants. "Strange," he murmured, voice modulated like wind through glass. "This world's dominant species is extinct, and yet they built shrines for the dead." A second Ilari, younger and curious, knelt before a headstone shaped like a cross. "Perhaps they revered the concept of termination," she suggested. "These markers, these stone relics, each one a symbol of devotion to an abstract end." "Fascinating." Carol recorded the observation. The Ilari had traveled for centuries, cataloging extinct civilizations. They were anthropologists of the void, driven not by conquest, but by understanding. To them, death was nothing but a transition of energy, a neutral process, unworthy of reverence or fear. Yet here on this cold earth, humanity seemed to have built monuments to it. As they explored further, they found carvings, not just names, but words: beloved father, dear wife, forever missed. There were symbols of flowers, angels, hearts. Some graves held photographs, faded but still visible. The young one, her name was Lyra, touched a picture of an elderly woman holding a child. The child's face was caught mid-laughter. "They preserved images," Lyra whispered, "as if to stop time from consuming those they lost." Carol tilted his head. "An irrational practice. Once the body ceases, the pattern of life disperses. There is no value in remembrance." But as the night deepened, something stirred beneath the stillness of the cemetery. Not movement, presence. The Ilari's sensors began to pick up faint electromagnetic anomalies emanating from the stones themselves. Heartbeat frequencies, though ancient and static. Emotional residue encoded in matter. Commander Lyra said softly, scanning the readings. "The stones are resonating. These carvings, each one carries a distinct emotional signature." Coral frowned. "Emotional residue?" "Yes," Lyra replied. "They left feelings behind. Grief, love, longing. It's as if..." She paused, unable to finish the thought. "As if their emotions became part of the rock." For the first time, Coral felt uncertainty. The Ilari prided themselves on logic, on clarity, but this place defied both. The stones whispered not words, but sensations. And when the wind swept through the cemetery, it sounded almost like weeping. At midnight, the sky opened. Starlight pooled across the marble, and for an instant, holographic projections flickered, echoes of humans standing beside their own graves, hands clasped, heads bowed, not worshipping death, remembering love. Carl turned slowly toward Lyra. "Perhaps," he murmured, voice trembling for the first time, "we have misinterpreted their faith." Lyra looked up, eyes glowing silver. "Commander, what if they did not worship death?" She hesitated, then whispered, "What if they worshipped love itself?" By dawn, the mist had settled over the cemetery like a living thing. Pale sunlight broke through in fractured beams, catching on thousands of polished headstones that gleamed like scattered mirrors. The Ilari had set up research stations among the graves, their instruments whispering with readings that defied translation. Lyra stood before one of the oldest stones, her silver fingertips tracing the carved words. "Until we meet again." She tilted her head. "This is not the language of death," she said quietly. "It's a promise." Carol approached, scanning the text. "A promise to what?" "The organism is gone. Reunion is impossible." "Not to them," Lyra replied. "Look, the symbols repeat across multiple graves. Different dialects, same meaning." "They believed in continuation." Carol frowned. "Superstition." Lyra smiled faintly, her eyes reflecting the morning light. "Or hope." The commander turned away. He had no patience for sentiment. He had dissected 1,000 civilizations that clung to myth. Yet something about this place unsettled him. The data streams from their probes showed electromagnetic fluctuations that corresponded not to decay but to memory patterns. Each grave emitted a unique emotional frequency, like fingerprints in the ether. "Commander," one of the technicians called from the monitors. "Look at this." On the screen, a pulse emerged from beneath the ground, gentle, rhythmic, almost human. The energy signature corresponded to brainwave patterns once catalogued from ancient human archives. But these weren't biological remains, they were echoes, emotional imprints, preserved in the crystalline structure of the stone. Carol's gaze darkened. Impossible, yet the readings persisted. The graves weren't static, they were transmitters. Later that evening, Lyra ventured further into the cemetery's heart, where the tombs were larger and adorned with statues of angels, clasping trumpets or swords. She ran her hand over one of the marble figures and felt a pulse through her skin, a whisper that wasn't T-sound but thought. Lyra. She froze. The voice was faint, distant, like wind through dry leaves. It spoke in English, an extinct tongue she had learned through archives. "Who's there?" she asked softly. "Don't be afraid," the voice murmured. "You're listening." The air thickened. Around her, the stones began to hum, a low resonance that vibrated in her bones. Data from her suit streamed uncontrollably. Thousands of overlapping emotional signals, sorrow, joy, yearning, all converging into a single pattern. She activated her recorder. "Commander, the stones are communicating." Carol's voice crackled through the link. "Clarify. They're not just markers," Lyra whispered, eyes wide. "They're records. Every word, every carving, it's part of a greater network, a human memory field." Carol arrived minutes later, his expression unreadable. He reached out to one of the glowing gravestones. They encoded emotion in matter. He murmured, "A technology based on empathy, not technology," Lyra said. "Instinct. Love is the oldest code." The commander stood in silence. Around them, the whispers of billions of vanished lives drifted like music through the Iran orchestra of devotion written in marble and moss. "Commander," Lyra said softly, "perhaps we're not studying their death rituals." Carol looked up toward the horizon where the sun burned gold through the fog. "Then what are we studying?" Lyra's voice trembled as she answered. "The proof that they never stopped loving." Night fell again over the Valley of Graves, and the Illyri camp pulsed with quiet awe. The discoveries of the last cycle had shaken even Carol's cold logic. Now the mission had shifted from mere cataloging to listening. Lyra stood in the dark with a sensor array wrapped around her forearm, tuning it like an instrument. Each grave responded to her proximity with faint waves of energy, like ripples in invisible water. The data translated into audio frequencies, and through her earpiece, she could hear its soft hums, fragments of voices, distant laughter, and weeping intertwined in a haunting melody. "Every emotional imprint is linked," she whispered. "Each life connected to another through these memorials. Together they form something vast, something alive." Carol approached quietly behind her. His steps were soundless, but she felt the shift in the air when he spoke. "Alive, yes," Lyra said. "Not in the biological sense. It's cohesive, responsive. The more we interact with it, the stronger the resonance becomes." Carol studied the readings, a self-reinforcing emotional network. He looked toward the endless rows of stones glowing faintly in the starlight. They built this unintentionally, an emergent consciousness born from remembrance. Lyra nodded. The collective heart. The term hung between them like breath in the cold air. At 2 o'clock hours, a strange phenomenon began. The wind died. The stars above flickered, and the sensors lit up in perfect synchronization. All the gravestones began to emit a single unified pulse, slow and rhythmic, like a heartbeat. Carol's voice turned sharp. "Power surge." "Negative," Lyra said, trembling. "It's not mechanical. It's emotional coherence. They're responding to us." From the center of the cemetery, light bloomed gold and white, spiraling upward. The forms that appeared were translucent, human-shaped, but woven from energy. Not ghosts, not holograms, echoes. They surrounded the Illyri silently, eyes bright with remembered life. Carl froze as one of them, an old man in a tattered coat, crouched out, his hand passing gently through Carol's chest. In that instant, the commander felt something that language could not contain. Memories, thousands of them, faces of humans, smiling, crying, embracing, births, deaths, weddings, wars, all stitched together by a single thread. Love. Carl stumbled back, clutching his chest. What was that? Lyra knelt beside him, tears streaking her metallic skin. "They're showing us what they were, what they left behind." She turned to the luminous figures. "You remember each other, don't you?" The figures flickered. A chorus of whispers rose, layered and overlapping, but one word stood out clearly: always. Carl looked up at the thousands of graves glowing like constellations. "We thought they feared death," he whispered. "But he stopped," voice cracking. "They defied it." Lyra smiled through her tears. "They didn't build cemeteries to mourn the end. They built them to keep love alive after the end." The figures began to fade back into the night, leaving only the soft hum of the stones behind. Carl turned to Lyra. "If what you say is true, then love is not just emotion." She met his gaze. "It's the only form of immortality they ever needed." and somewhere deep beneath the earth, the hum of the collective heart pulsed once more, steady, eternal. The following morning arrived with a silence so complete it felt sacred. The sky hung heavy with grey clouds, and the air shimmered faintly, as though the planet itself were holding its breath. The Ilari expedition had gathered at the center of the cemetery, surrounding the core node, the oldest grave. A stone so worn that even the name upon it had vanished. Carroll stood before it, hands clasped behind his back, his usual composure faltering. He hadn't slept. Memory of the old man's touch haunted him, an echo vibrating in the hollow of his chest. For the first time in his long ordered life, something felt infinite. "Commander," said Lyra softly, stepping beside him, "the resonance hasn't stopped since last night. It's growing stronger. The field is expanding." "Expanding," she nodded, showing him her scanner. The readings pulsed outward in concentric waves, spreading far beyond the cemetery's borders. Each pulse carried a harmonic signature of emotional frequencies: love, sorrow, joy, longing, interwoven like the notes of a symphony. Carroll's voice trembled. "They're awakening." He looked toward the graves. The air above them rippled, faint lights forming currents that danced between the stones like fireflies. Then, the ground began to vibrate. From every headstone, fine particles of dust lifted and hovered, forming glowing filaments of memory. They wove through the air, connecting one grave to another, until the entire cemetery pulsed like a living neural network. Lyra's voice dropped to a whisper. "It's beautiful." Carroll stepped closer. "No, it's more than that." A sudden surge of energy raced through the field, striking their instruments and knocking several Ilari to their knees. The light intensified until it became blinding, and then everything stopped. The air cleared. Silence again, but the Ilari were no longer in the cemetery. They stood in a vast field of light, an ethereal plain stretching beyond sight. All around them shimmered the figures of humans, millions of them gathered like a great assembly beneath a sky of gold. Lyra gasped. "We're inside the memory field." Carroll turned slowly, wonder overtaking his fear. They built an afterlife. The figures moved, gently, interacting with one another, laughing, embracing, living, not as ghosts, not as fragments, but as pure emotion given form. And in the center of it all rose a figure of light, brighter than the rest, its voice calm and resonant like distant thunder. "You came seeking death," it said, "but found what we left behind." Carroll stepped forward, his voice shaking. "Who are you?" "I am the echo of humanity," it replied. "The memory of love they could not bear to let go." Lyra felt her knees weaken. "You're alive in every way that matters," the figure said. They feared nothing, not even the end. Every tear, every heartbeat, every promise they gave it form. They wove love into stone, and in doing so they built eternity. Carroll lowered his gaze, overwhelmed. "We thought you worshipped death." The figure smiled, a warmth that filled the infinite field. "No, we loved too deeply to let death win." The light began to fade, but its final words lingered in the air. "Remember us not for our end, but for how fiercely we loved." As the Ilari awoke back in the real cemetery, the gravestones still glowed faintly, pulsing with the rhythm of a human heart. The Ilari had no sunrise on their home world. But on Earth, as dawn crept across the hills, Carroll watched the first light spill across the gravestones and felt something stir inside him that his species had no name for. Around him, the research camp had transformed into something far quieter. The younger scientists no longer spoke in technical terms. They whispered as if afraid to disturb the sacred hum that still pulsed through the stones. Even the air shimmered with faint vibrations, a music just beyond the range of hearing. Carroll stood beside Lyra near the central monument, the nameless stone that had become the epicenter of the memory field. He turned the recording unit in his hands, an artifact now filled with terabytes of human emotion. "Every frequency we've captured," he said softly, "contains overlapping waves of empathy. Each one amplifies the other. This is not data. It's a feeling." Lyra smiled faintly. "Then perhaps we're not here to study them anymore. Perhaps we're here to learn." He looked at her, puzzled. "Yes," she said. "The humans found a way to make love survive entropy. They couldn't escape death, but they refused to let love die with it. Maybe that's the only true victory any species can achieve." Carroll's mind turned in ways it never had before. The Ilari had conquered time, disease, and distance. They had lived for centuries in the pursuit of knowledge, but never connection. Their civilization was vast but empty. He looked down at the stone beneath his hands, tracing the faint outline of a forgotten name. "Do you think," he began, slowly, "we could do the same?" Lyra's eyes glowed silver blue. "I think they wanted us to." Just then, the central monument began to pulse again, slow, deliberate, rhythmic. The hum deepened into a tone that resonated in the bones. Across the entire field, the other stones responded, like a chorus joining a conductor. Carol's scanner flashed a warning. Energy convergence detected. But it wasn't dangerous. It was inviting. The two of them stood in the midst of the light as waves of memory washed over them. This time, it wasn't sorrow or loss, it was warmth, laughter, shared hands, lullabies. The first breath of a newborn. The final words of the dying whispered into a loved one's ear. It was everything humanity had ever been, distilled into the pure vibration of love. Carol fell to his knees. The feeling pierced through him not as data, but as truth. We were wrong, he whispered. We thought worship meant fear, but theirs was devotion. To each other the field brightened. A final message formed in the light before them, a phrase repeated across dozens of languages etched in shimmering code. Remember us when you love. And then, just as suddenly, the light faded. Silence returned, gentle, complete, eternal. Lyra turned to Carol. Commander, what will we tell the council? Carol looked toward the horizon where the sunlight broke through the clouds like the opening of heaven itself. The truth, he said quietly. That humanity discovered what we never did. He paused, voice trembling. They made love eternal. 3 cycles later, the Illyri fleet prepared to depart Earth. The ships hovered silently above the mist-cloaked cemetery, their hulls reflecting the morning light like liquid glass. But Carol stood alone among the gravestones, one hand resting upon the nameless monument that had become both mystery and revelation. He had ordered all instruments powered down. No more scanning, no more data extraction. We've taken enough, he'd said. Now we must give something back. Around him, the cemetery was still save for the faint hum that never truly stopped. It had become the heartbeat of the planet itself. Lyra approached, her voice soft. The others are ready to leave. The council demands your report. Carol turned to her slowly. And what shall I tell them, Lyra? That we found eternity written in grief. That the extinct taught us what it means to live. She tilted her head. Tell them the truth. That love is energy, and energy never dies. He smiled faintly, a rare expression for an Illyri. You sound human. Lyra looked toward the horizon, where morning broke in golden silence. Maybe that's the point. They stood together for a long time, listening to the breeze sigh through the trees. It carried whispers, faint and tender. Thank you. Remember us. Love endures. Carol knelt, placing a small silver shard at the base of the monument. It was a memory crystal, a sacred relic of the Illyri designed to store their collective consciousness. Let them know us, he said. Let their field remember we came, and that we finally understood. As the shard touched the earth, it glowed softly. For a moment the hum deepened, resonating through the ground. Tiny motes of light rose around the two explorers, gentle, almost playful. The field was responding, welcoming them into its vast communion. Lyra's eyes widened. They accepted it. Carol nodded. Now we are part of their memory. We will live here, to among their love. When they returned to the ship, Corral opened the communication channel to the High Council. His voice, usually measured and precise, carried an unfamiliar warmth. This world is not dead, he began. It breathes through stone and silence. Its people built monuments not to death, but to devotion. Every grave is a signal. Every grave is a signal. Every name a heartbeat. They created a network of love so strong it refused to decay. He paused, glancing through the viewport at the glowing cemetery below. We came seeking data and found something greater, proof that emotion transcends entropy. Love is not an illusion of biology, it is the force that binds memory to existence. If we are wise, we will learn from them. The council was silent for a long time before acknowledging the transmission. As the ship ascended, the Earth's curvature unfolded beneath the ocean's gleaming. Continents veiled in cloud. From orbit, the cemetery was invisible, yet Carol knew it was there, pulsing quietly, like a secret heartbeat beneath the planet's skin. Before turning away, he whispered, not as a commander, but as something newly human. Goodbye, keepers of love. And somewhere far below, the stones glowed once more, their pulse echoing into eternity, not a requiem for the dead, but a song for the living.